No, but so I graduated in '04, and this is the first time I've ever been asked to speak about diversity. So I've seen it from, for almost 15 years of coming out as a graduate, being invisible. And I don't know if that's really down to my the color of my skin per se, but I definitely felt like an outsider, and that's not anyone's fault particularly. But and then going through various different companies, so went through IDEO, Johnson Banks, Wolf Ollins. Well, I spent most time at Johnson Banks, but then I spent a little bit of time at Wolf Ollins, and then I tried to, because I saw myself. I saw myself as a creative director, or I felt ready to be accepted. But the problem was these big agencies, which I thought would have been a perfect match for me, didn't see me as that person. So I was there behind the scenes, but they didn't see in their mind's eye that I could fill that role.
Super interesting. So so I'm an architect. So in terms of the built environment, completely opposite to you, Pali. I think I've been asked probably about 20 times in the last year to talk about diversity and inclusion. But to be fair, it was last year, and it was almost like a slow kind of winding path towards it. And I think just in terms of the issues that we face is really about this assumptions, like really dangerous assumptions as to what does an architect look like, what does an urban designer look like, because for example, the first time I applied for a job, the first time I went for an interview as an architectural assistant, the first thing they said to me was, "Oh, I didn't expect you to be Black." So that's almost like my starting point. But my name is Stephanie Edwards, maybe it's that, or maybe it's because of the university I went to, but there is always that fact that I go through any door or any interview almost thinking that in the back of my mind, that not that I'm not supposed to be there, but it's a surprise that I'm there. And so the issues for me is that actually there's been so much exclusion in the sector itself that actually you don't see someone like myself. If you type in architect, a Black woman does not appear. And 2 years ago, we were told that, Black architects and, architects of colour do not exist. But actually, on the back of that, and the back of the Black Lives Matter movement, we've already come to the forefront. And what's been really great actually about this is that it has really uncovered a lot of great voices, whether that's through tick boxes where people are starting to realise they shouldn't have all white panels and all male panels, but actually it's really unveiled some great people, some hidden talent. And so I'm quite conflicted because it is quite tiring to constantly be asked to talk about it, but it's really important that we do talk about it in a really frank and clear way. I think it's really important that we also understand the value of it, and that it's not just about tick boxes, but actually it's about understanding the value. We know that diverse teams, for example, will yield over 75% more than an individual or of a single type of team. So it's about actually us having really honest conversations about why it's important to have diversity in the forefront as part of teams, and also just to actually start to empower the future. I'm very much looking at space, but if you don't have people from different backgrounds designing space, how can we have the right cultural cues to invite people to take up space? How can they feel that they are included? So in terms of issues, I feel like there are structural issues within the profession. There are issues in terms of representations, in terms of just the face and role models. And there's issues of also, putting all of this good work to waste by just tick boxing and not understanding that actually you need structural and real change with action as opposed to just words.
Forrest, I'm really interested to hear your perspectives, because you're coming from a different country as well, which will have some very different and very interesting perspectives, I suspect.
Absolutely. I think some are probably similar and some are probably, distinct. I think that's interesting looking at BAME versus BIPOC. They're already suggestive of, Black and Indigenous, people of color, and our unique country's history relative.
Forrest, I know what BIPOC stands for, but I'm not sure necessarily everyone will. Do you just want to?
Sure. So it was an acronym called Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and specifically it was to acknowledge, all the different ranges of underrepresented and underinvested people in the United States, and specifically to acknowledge, the Indigenous community that oftentimes is left out of the conversation, or they're not on the panels that, often, I'm asked to speak at. And I think it's important, we've seen, some of the things, speakers opening with land acknowledgements and things like that, which are very good. But I think one of the things that, you're asking, John, is we're looking into the chasm of some of these systemic issues. And so how do we truly look at it in totality beyond these kind of superficial things, that we've kind of, acknowledged that Pali mentioned, the kind of virtue signaling. And I think that the way that I've looked at it is that you only choose to become a designer in some capacity when you see a role model that looks roughly like yourself. And so that probably starts, when you're, 15 or 16. And so I think this is our job as professionals to provide those representational stages to kind of to telegraph that this is a welcoming space. Secondly, I think that art school education is a very difficult argument to make in certain households relative to the return on what you may be going into, quote unquote, the soft fields. It's certainly not a doctor or a lawyer. And I think specifically in certain communities, definitely whether you're, first generation immigrant families or BIPOC families, art school is not justifiable. With the absence of role models and with the absence of a quote unquote ROI that you can point to, it seems like a very precarious journey. And so I think a lot of those students that I see, because I also am a senior critic at Yale, and I see that a lot of the students that come into these programs, if you are paying back a lot of student loans, you start to treat your educational experience as a bridge to a vocation and an income earning opportunity to be able to get yourself, back above water. And the students that don't have, those particular concerns are much more self-possessed. They're much more expansive and experimental because they're not necessarily seeing the urgency of that. And so these are some of the softer issues that I don't think we necessarily speak about. And then you have the network effects of, students that are going to particular schools or belong to specific, organizations that are able to kind of fast track into matriculation. And then I think we get to the professional conversation, which we have here, which is about, the conversations around, virtue signaling and tokenism. And at that point, we're almost too late because at that point, the path has been broken about in 4 different places. And so I think it's great to look at systemically, what are all these moments that we can look at, from role modeling to mentorship and fellowship, which might happen much, much earlier than we're looking now. And then ultimately, what are the types of job bridges that we can provide? And ultimately then, and one of the things that you mentioned, John, is senior leadership, and the Pali spoke about this, is a lot of companies now are hiring at the junior ranks. But the most difficult thing that we're seeing is the transition from the junior rank to the senior rank into leadership. And that feels like it's a huge gap that the profession needs to address.